Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Robbins, and welcome to the Life, Death, and Space Between podcast. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and medium. I know it seems like a strange combination, but that gives me a unique view of life and death. Death can be scary. I get that. That's why I'm doing this. I want to help people explore life, death, and what it all means. We are born and we die. What we do in the middle is the space between. Mark Coleman is the author of From Suffering to Peace, Make Peace with Your Mind and Awake in the Wild. He is the founder of the Mindfulness Institute and has an MA in clinical psychology. Mark has guided students on 5 continents as a corporate consultant, counselor, meditation teacher, and wilderness guide. He lives in Northern California, and today I'm excited to welcome him to Life, Death, and the Space Between podcast. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Amy. Great to be with you.
Great to have you here today. So let's start by you giving us a definition of what mindfulness is, as well as your perspective on how it's sort of changed and gotten watered down, perhaps in the past 20, 25 years.
Yeah, so the simple definition, mindfulness is basically clear awareness. It's the knowing what's happening as it's happening. And for a more fuller definition, it's the awareness of our physical, mental, emotional, and environmental experience with an attitude of curiosity and kindness that supports understanding and wisdom. And that's a long definition. But basically, it's the awareness of our experience. And this is what's gotten forgotten about. As mindfulness has exploded, it's been reduced to attention, just focusing, right? Which is one part of mindfulness, is paying attention in the present moment, with clarity, with focus. But the context of that practice is we do that not as an end in itself, although it's a good thing to be aware, it's a good thing to be present. But as we become present, it allows us to know ourselves and each other and reality with more depth, with more clarity, with more understanding. And the reason we do that is because if we don't do that, we end up causing a lot of stress and pain and unnecessary suffering for ourselves and others.
So can you give an example of what it looks like to be present in day-to-day life? Because I think people can sometimes think they're being present when they're not, or I don't know that people really fully understand how that translates.
Yeah. So, there's different levels of that, right? So, for example, here's a classic example. You drive to work every day, same drive, same commute, same traffic, same route. And someone asks you, oh, how was your drive today? And because you were either on your phone, listening to the radio, or just spaced out, lost in thought, which we are most of the time, you might say, I don't know, I can't actually even remember which roads I took. I think I came that way, but I don't actually remember anything of the whole 30-minute commute. That's being present enough not to crash, which is helpful, but not present enough to really recollect and be present for all of that experience, how you were feeling, what you noticed, the beautiful day or the commute or the thoughts that you were having. So that's one simple example of how we live on that autopilot where, and we do a lot of things on autopilot. We walk the dog, we drive, we do the dishes, we clean the house, we go to meetings, and we're sort of there, but our attention or our mind is usually thinking about something else, right? That's our autopilot state. Versus being present, like walking the dog, and being present is feeling the feel of the leather leash in your hand, and you're walking outside and you notice, oh, it's cool today, and the crispness of the air is brushing against your cheeks, but you notice that the air is really fresh, and you take an inhale and it's revitalizing. and you're listening to the crunch of snow on the ground as you walk, or you're noticing perhaps the, spring is coming, and the buds that I've noticed on the trees all winter are suddenly opening, and I notice my state of mind starts to feel a little more expansive because I'm now outside and not stuck in my office or wherever I left. Mm-hmm. And so it's just that there's a multi-layered, it's a textured level of awareness. In the same way, like when you're, say, giving a presentation at work, like if I'm teaching in a company, awareness allows me to be aware of myself, be aware of the room, be aware of the people, be aware of the material, be aware of the time, be aware of how I'm feeling, be aware of the energy in the room. And so I just do that with a lot more skill than if I'm not that present.
And meditation is the tool to get you to that presence.
Right. So meditation, particularly mindfulness meditation, is a training. Like we go to the gym to work out the body. We meditate as a training for the mind. And so with mindfulness meditation, we're cultivating attention, awareness, mindfulness, and that's directed to certain things. So usually most people, when they meditate with mindfulness practice, you're paying attention to your breath, you're paying attention to your body, you're paying attention to your feelings, you're paying attention to your thoughts. And so you're developing that self-awareness, which naturally and somewhat sort of magically translates. So if you meditate for a few weeks, you'll find, even if you've just focused on your breath for a month, 10 minutes a day, you'll notice that you start to be a little more aware, maybe when you're in conversation with your kids, or a little more aware when you're getting reactive to a colleague at work, or a little more aware that you, after every meal, you feel bloated because you've overeaten. It just, when we cultivate the muscle of awareness, which we're doing in meditation, it naturally starts to translate because that awareness is not separate. So in the same way that when you work out the body, you might not like the gym because it's kind of hard work, but you start to feel more energy and more vital and more, poised in life.
And one of the concepts that I think has been happening more and more in, I guess, these times is, and you mentioned it earlier, that it's become, I think I hear this a lot in my practice, people get stuck on this notion of when I'm sitting in I'm not good at meditation. I hear that a lot. I'm not good at meditation because when I sit quietly, my mind races, or I have all these thoughts and I can't get these thoughts to go away. Can you speak to that piece of this?
I mean, often, I'm sitting on a plane and someone says, "What do you do?" And I say, "I teach meditation." They say, "Oh, I can't do that. I think too much." I'm like, that's exactly why you meditate, to train your mind, because we all think too much. We're all multitasking now. We're all hyper distractible, and technology is making our attention literally decrease, capacity to concentrate. And so that's the perfect reason for meditating, because meditation, the popular view of meditation is you sit, you close your eyes, you bliss out, you have a great time, and you're floating on clouds, right? But actually, mindfulness practice is no different than your life. You sit and you're present to your experience. And sometimes that's beautiful, sometimes it's hard, sometimes it's boring, sometimes you're irritated, sometimes you're distracted and thinking a lot and worrying about your kids, sometimes you're peaceful. And mindfulness is simply knowing what's happening, meeting it with awareness, attention, curiosity, and then learning how to work with that. So the main work that you do in meditation is you get distracted. You notice you start thinking about work and you go, okay, that's not what I'm doing right now. Not now. I'll think about that later. And you come back to the breath. And then 2 seconds later, but what about my kids? I forgot to drop off their lunch. Well, I'll do that after the meditation. Come back, feel your breath. Oh, but what about tonight and my dinner? Come back. And so meditation is a training in how to sustain that present moment attention, which is a great skill in life, because like in conversations, if you actually pay attention when we're listening to someone, our mind is going off all the time. Like you're a psychologist, I'm sure. When you're working with people, you're listening, very engaged, but the mind gets distracted. And the more that we are self-aware, the more we acknowledge that, bring it back quicker, and actually have more quality conversations, as one example.
So I hear a lot too, people who have said, oh, I don't need to meditate. I'm fine being alone. I'm always just thinking, and I'm very, I can be in my head and I'm comfortable with that, but not the same.
Right. No, very different. So I think of thinking as a suboptimal state of happiness, right? We all love to think, we fantasize, we think about our holidays and our great memories and people we love, and all that's fine. The challenge, though, is that basically, as someone once said from a long time ago, the mind is a great servant, but a terrible master. And we're mostly driven by our mind rather than being choiceful. So, for example, we can be doing something. Maybe we go watch a great movie or watch our kids perform at school or do something we're really excited about. But our attention, our mind is thinking about some problem, something we're stressing about, and we can barely be present for the performance, let's say, because our mind is running the show, right? So that's why it's useful to learn to train the mind so we can have choice when to think, when to plan, when to fantasize and ruminate, and when to actually be present. And if we haven't trained our mind, the mind is mostly going to be the master. And the mind as a master, will tend to rule the roost and be life, right? How many times have you been, watching your kids play soccer or, at a great, concert or a family function, and it's hard to be present because your mind's worrying, spaced out, distracted. And so the beautiful thing about mindfulness training is it allows us to actually really be present to ourselves, to life, to experience, to our family. It's very enriching. Mm-hmm. So the return on the investment, to use that very crude, sort of business term, is actually very large, because we put in 20 minutes of meditation a day, that will significantly enhance our well-being and quality of life.
Mm-hmm. So in your book, which I loved, and I read a lot of books. I read a lot of books on a lot of topics, particularly for this podcast. But one of the things I shared with you earlier was how it made the concept of meditation very digestible, and talked about different areas in which you can kind of focus, the physical body, the emotional body. But one of the things that you said was, you talk about this mantra called one less. What do you mean by that? And how can we use that in everyday life?
Yeah, that's it's one of my favorite current mantras. So it comes out of the reflection. So my training is in the Buddhist tradition, and that's where the mindfulness teachings come from. And that's where the reason I wrote the book was to bring back into the public domain of the conversation that the point of mindfulness is to explore these deeper truths of life, including the reality that everything's transient, and loss and death and change are very much part of the fabric of life. And the more that we deny them, the more that they smack us in the face. Mm-hmm. And the more that we turn to them and meet them and understand them and accept them as a natural part of life, the more we're going to live with wisdom, with less holding on, with letting go, all kinds
less anxiety, depression, right?
Right. Less fear. So the one less reflection came out of understanding this. There's many meditations where you can orient to the changing nature of experience. Everything is changing all the time. We know things change intellectually, but we get really surprised or hurt or pissed off when things change, like a relationship changes or our health changes or even the weather or politics change. Like we get surprisingly surprised, even though we know that's the basic fabric of life as things change. So the one less reflection came from a practice I was doing of just reflecting, like every breath that I take is changing. Every sensation I feel is changing. Every experience I have is changing. Not only is it changing, it's one less time I will experience it in this life. Like each time I see the full moon rise, is one less time in my lifetime I will see it right. Every time we experience a beautiful summer, if we think of the seasons in our lives, how many seasons do we have left? If we're lucky, maybe, depending on our age, 10, 30, 50, but they're limited. And so when I reflect a one less, it makes me realize, oh, this isn't going to go on forever. And because it's not going on forever, I really want to be present for it. And so each breath that I take, the inhale, I say one, each exhale, I say less, one less, one less. And it makes me just, the point of that reflection is to remind us of the transience of things. And therefore, because things are transient, they're precious, right? This one spring, this one breath, this one smile from my child, that's one less time I'll see that. And so let's really be present and enjoy that. And also let it go, but appreciate it while it's here. Kiss the joy as it flies, as Blake said.
That's intense, because I think where my mind goes, even though I'm trying to be present, my mind's going, is how do you do that without attaching to a feeling of sadness about it?
Right. Well, so again, back to what mindfulness practice is meeting our experience as it is. So if sadness arises, like you're watching the full moon, which maybe that's one of your things that you love, and it's like, oh, one less full moon rise I will see in my life. There still might be hundreds, but it's one less guaranteed.
Right. I'm a sunrise person, so
okay,
and sunsets. When that sun sets, it takes my breath away every single time.
Right. And you don't necessarily need to say, oh, it's going to be one less sunrise, but the truth is that is true.
Right.
But especially when it's something finite, like, this is one less graduation that I'm going to see my kid go through, right? So that's very true. It's got a very finite end to it. Mm-hmm. And of course, sadness might arise, or grief, or tenderness, or vulnerability, or poignancy. And so with mindfulness, we're also welcoming that. It's really just meeting the truth of experience. And if that does evoke sadness, then we acknowledge that. And that too will pass. Mm-hmm. But it's totally an appropriate emotion at times to feel tender or sad. Like, oh, that's too bad. I only have 7 more graduation ceremonies, and then my kids are at college or whatever. It's like, yeah, there's a poignancy to that. And then the more that we can meet the feelings that come up in response to change and transience and loss, the less likely we are to be really sort of flattened or thrown aside when the bigger losses come, because we're training ourselves to acknowledge, oh yeah, this is true. Everything changes, everything goes, everything eventually passes. And so when the bigger stuff happens, like someone we love passes, we're not fighting it so much, because well, of course, we'll do everything we can to help and protect and save. Mm-hmm. And we know, and things are going to pass away.
Right. That's the impermanence, right, of the moment, but also of life.
Yeah. Yeah. And meeting it with, and that's why I talk a lot, and there's a whole section in the book called, about cultivating, training the heart with mindfulness, which is basically awareness. We're also learning to bring kindness into that awareness. So for example, with this example of reflecting on loss and change and impermanence, often it brings sadness, or it reminds us of other things we've lost. And it's important that we meet that, not just with clarity, but also with kindness, with a compassionate attention. Because that also, when we can hold difficult experience with a loving awareness, not just awareness, but a loving attention, it gives us more capacity to hold it.
So one of the things on the topic of impermanence, one of the chapters in your book is called Embracing Death's Invitation. And I think you and I think similarly on this topic. How do we keep this notion top of mind without it destroying us? And from a psychological perspective, we defend against death, because there has to be some of that healthy defenses, I think, because otherwise you could be walking around all the time thinking anxious that at any moment you could die and this could be it. And that's not a great way to live. So can you speak a little to how you recommend that we keep death as a focus? Because I do believe if we can keep it at the forefront, we can really live such a more full, delicious life but also not letting it feed into anxiety, which I think so many people, at the core of their anxiety is this fear of their mortality.
Right. Yeah, it is a balance, and it's important to be balanced. And you bring up an important point around when any of these practices like death reflection or impermanence reflection or meeting loss, and there's other similar practices in the book, whenever those reflections or those practices lead to overwhelming states of sadness, grief, loss, fear, anxiety, despair, then that's the time to shift the attention away from that reflection to something else. Ideally, something that's uplifting, something that's grounding, something that brings a sense of lightness or ease. So, for example, like taking the bigger picture, so a lot of my work, as you know, is around nature. And we can look at nature right now from two perspectives. One, knowing that it's all being destroyed, right? Species are being lost at unprecedented rates. Every system on the earth, water, it is being challenged. And we can either focus on the loss, which there's many, many losses right now, especially around in endangered species and ecosystems. Or we can also focus on the fact that right now it's springtime and it's beautiful and there's blossoms and there's grass and there's baby lambs being born and deers. And so when I take people out into nature, I'm both having them really take in the beauty and the joy, because that's equally true as the loss and the degradation. And to know when it's appropriate to look at the beauty, because that's when you need to be nourished and feeling, the beauty of this earth. And at times to also notice, and let in the loss. But if the loss leads to overwhelm and despair, it's time to shift the attention back to, yes, that's true, but it's also spring, and it's also a beautiful rainfall and forest smells, and the daffodils are blooming. And so it's about holding balance. And that's the same with ourselves on a more personal level, right? Like, for example, a couple of things that I do. Every time I hear a siren, I think, oh, someone's had an accident and quite possibly sick or dying or dead, right? And just like, oh yes, and that's part of life. Every time I see roadkill, and I live sort of on the edge of nature, I see plenty of roadkill, birds and animals. I make it my practice to look. I want to look away because, like, oh, it's, dead bodies. But
I usually see dead rats in Chicago, which
right.
isn't so appealing. I'll look at like a raccoon, but these rats, I don't know.
Right. But it's I do that not because I enjoy it, but it's like, oh, right, that's part of life, is death. And so I find that just a healthy reflection. Or when I hear on the news of someone who's died, or I hear a friend who's sick, it's like, that, yes, it's going to happen to all of us. We're going to get sick. We're going to age. At some point, we're going to die. So I don't keep it as a permanent reflection.
Right.
But a reflection enough to know that when I hear it, I'm not surprised by it, right? Because, our culture suppresses it. We hide it. We put sick and old and dead people in a building somewhere. And so we all get surprised. When I'm in India, dead bodies are being, marched in procession through the streets to the funeral grounds. And it's like, all right, death is normalized. So we have to find our own way to contemplate that, yeah, things change, things age, things get sick, things die. And that will happen to me. And again, we don't have to do it every day, but, as a meditation practice, there's various kinds of meditation practice where we reflect on our own mortality. We reflect that the only certainty in our lives is death. And what's uncertain is the timing. And so that, and the point of that, not to depress us, but to actually go, okay, well, what do I want to do with this one wild and precious life that I don't know how long I'm going to be here for. So let's make the most of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And really live. And that's, I think, how you can love more, and this is morbid, but I mean, every morning I send my kids to school, and obviously it's a very scary time to send your kids to school in this country. I do have the thought of like, what if they don't come home? And it brings tears to my eyes, even just saying it to you right now. And I never let them leave the house without me saying to them, I love you, and giving them a kiss.
Beautiful.
Because it's holding both of those realities at the same time that allows you to feel more love.
Right. Yeah, because if you don't have that, kids go to school and maybe you're tired or grumpy or stressed and you're like, oh, get out of here, get out from under my feet. And as you say, there's, we know these stories of people, in the 9/11 tower, or, they forgot to say goodbye to their beloved. And then suddenly, they're in a coma. And all right, because I assumed, as we do, because we have to assume on one level that things are going to continue. But we also, we miss those opportunities to make so that moment for you saying goodbye is very precious. And why not, and why not make every moment that precious? Because it's not going to last. And so it just allows us to wake up, it's the ironic thing. People think death reflection is morbid, depressing, but actually it creates a poignancy and a tenderness for life and for really being here in this moment, enjoying this day and this smile and this conversation and this sunrise, etc.
So let's shift a little bit, and can we talk about consciousness and how you understand where our consciousness exists?
Oh my, that's an interesting question. So from my experience, consciousness is not localized. So we assume, because we're head-centered and because we think a lot and because our head houses most of our sensory organs, we tend to think of consciousness in our brain, or some people associate consciousness with brain, and certainly scientists might, or we associate it with our head or our head center. In some Hindu teachings, consciousness is the third eye and the center of the forehead. And my immediate experience is consciousness is not localized. It doesn't have a location, a shape, a size, a space, a color, an age, a gender, a form. But at the same time, it is, I think, one of the most mysterious things in life is it's clearly present. And consciousness is that which allows us to know. It's what allows us to be mindful and aware. And yet we can't find it, we can't see it, we can't name it, we can't place it, we can't label it. And yet it functions by itself and is the nature of our mind, which is equally undefinable. So it's one of those things that defies definition. And yet through mindfulness, we can actually we can turn attention to consciousness or awareness itself. We can learn to be present to this experience of knowing, right? We can know it through inference. We can know it through its function, and its function is to know, is to be present. So when I don't have one nearby, but if I had a bell, right, and I ring the bell, or just listening to the sound of my voice, you don't have to make any effort to hear me, right? That's consciousness is happening by itself. It's not even ours. It's just doing its thing that gives us information about ourselves and life. And what mindfulness, the relationship between mindfulness and consciousness is mindfulness. With mindfulness practice, we're growing that. We're kind of growing that quality of consciousness. We're making it more foreground and more developed.
So from a psychological perspective, Freud would say the process of therapy is making the unconscious conscious. Mindfulness does the same thing in some ways, right? It brings all of these unconscious feelings that we have that we might be repressing to our awareness. The difference, I think it seems like, is that mindfulness just allows you to recognize that they are there and not need to do anything with them. Right.
Yes. A few distinctions. So one, Freud was definitely really interested in the unconscious. I would say mindfulness makes one aware of the unconscious and of the conscious. We're not that aware of what's conscious. Like what's conscious is our everyday experience. We're basically mostly oblivious to most things most of the time, including ourselves or each other or environment, right? We're just lost in our head. So mindfulness is both making that really, it's the conscious knowing of that. And also it allows us to be more attuned to our inner world, including the unconscious, and allowing that to be more known. And then so there's two parts to mindfulness. One is the knowing of that, whether it's our inner or outer experience. And the second part is, and this is where the insight and the shift from suffering to peace comes in, which is why I titled the book that. The second part of mindfulness is how we relate to experience. Mindfulness is the knowing of experience and also paying attention to how we relate. What's our attitude? So for example, maybe you're sitting like I am in a chair and I have some chronic back pain.
Me too.
Okay. So I'm aware. So we'll practice right now live. So I'm aware of the back pain. That's the first level of stage of mindfulness. The second step is how am I paying attention, which means how am I relating to it? Am I hating it? Am I resisting it? Am I judging it? Am I contracting all my muscles around it? Am I afraid of it? Am I spinning out about the future of like, oh no, I'm got this pain now. I've got 5 more hours at my desk. It's going to be terrible by the end of the day. And right.
I'm not going to say my age, but I'm only X age. And what if this keeps going and it's only going to get worse. And then I can't walk when I'm 60. And
Right. And who's going to take the kids to school and how am I going to work? And I'm going to be on the street. And so that's a very negative, spinning out. Right. So that, and at the different levels, right. From the very subtle, like we just noticed first we sit down, there's that little twinge of like, oh, there it is again. And then immediately there's tightness. Oh no, there's fear. Oh no, I hate that. I'm sick of that. Why didn't I do my yoga class today? And so all that is how we create a lot of suffering. We layer on suffering or pain or stress on top of this basic element of experience, which in the moment for me is like a aching dullness in my, lower back. Right? So, and we do that with every experience, maybe your partner comes home from work and you say, hey, and they kind of, they've had a bad day and they kind of look grumpy and they kind of like, and then we make a whole story about, oh no, they're really unhappy. I must have done something wrong. They don't love me anymore. Maybe they're going to leave. It's like, no, they just, were feeling grumpy and they walked in, they're tired and they want to go rest. So we're layering on these layers of experience that are unconscious usually that create so much stress.
And that's what leads to the suffering, right? Because the pain is the back.
Right.
But the suffering is the story that you place on top. Like it's like the transparency. Now I'll age myself. Remember those transparencies from school?
Right.
Yes. With the projector.
Yeah.
That's the laying on top of that makes that pain, the story that we tell about that pain makes it suffering. Yeah.
And it's not just thoughts like, that example of your partner coming in being grumpy, that might trigger a huge wave of fear and anxiety, right? Or you're sitting in traffic and you're late for a meeting and that might also trigger, high blood pressure and rage because you either at the traffic or rage at yourself because you didn't leave early enough and your boss is coming to the meeting at 9:00 and blah, blah, blah. So there's many ways that creates a lot of unnecessary suffering. So the mindfulness brings the awareness to both the experience, traffic, partner, back pain, and also what we do with that. and mindfulness allows this space to unhook from a more negative or reactive way of relating to it, and allows us to find the wisdom or the wiser response, which might be kindness, or asking a question of your partner, or taking a breath, realizing you're not going to get to work any earlier if you get annoyed or not, or
Mm-hmm. So last question, what does your meditation practice look like?
So my practice is it's mindfulness based, awareness based, and mostly it's what I call a non-doing practice, where I'm simply present to the flow of my experience. So I sit and I'll ground myself from the body. I'll be aware of the sounds around me. I'll be aware of the breath as sort of like a touch point, aware of my energy, moods, thoughts, sense of space. But I'm basically just present to the flow of experience and abiding as much as I can in awareness, in the knowing of my experience. And of course, I get distracted and thoughts come and I come back. But basically just being present, resting in that knowing, spacious awareness, and allowing the flow of life to happen. And then at times insights and understandings and aha moments come, but basically just being present. But it's really, in life we prioritize the doing, the busyness, the activity. In meditation, in that style of awareness, that style of meditation, I'm prioritizing awareness and the knowing of it, and everything else is sort of secondary.
And I lied. One more question. Sometimes, this is my personal question because I get to do that when I interview people. When I'm in meditation, how do I differentiate between being in, because sometimes I will get to a very blissful state where I feel very expansive. Mm-hmm. And then I don't know if I've fallen asleep. Because it just feels so clear.
Right.
And peaceful. And it's almost like I don't feel my body anymore, my physical body.
Right.
I feel like I'm outside of it.
Right. Yeah. So I would say you're definitely not asleep, because one, you're aware and you're knowing that it's clear and calm and peaceful, and your body's, the sense of the physical body is dissolved. So usually when we get calm and concentrated, then all kinds of things start to happen. So like the candy of meditation, space, light, colors. Usually the body at some point softens, dissolves, becomes less prominent, and there's more sense of openness, spaciousness, lightness, and usually quite pleasurable, peaceful, not many thoughts, not many worries. And that's a deeper quality of meditation or absorption, I would say. And
then I catch myself going, how do I make this last forever? Right. And then I'm out of it in 2 seconds.
Right. So that's the relating to it that becomes faulty, right? That's, so, I talk about this a lot in the book. We have pleasant experience. And what do? We grab it, right? We hold on. How can I make this happen? How can I make it stay around? And as soon as we do that, we've stepped out of the state we were in, which was openness, relaxation, acceptance, allowing, and we're into gripping, wanting, demanding, right? So in the same way that we push the back pain away, the same way we grab onto the pleasurable stuff, and we create the same unnecessary dissatisfaction.
Got it.
And that's where the awareness illuminates, all right, here's this beautiful, expansive experience. If I grab onto it, it disappears. How about I just relax and enjoy it while it's here and let it go when it goes. But also learning, what was it? Maybe after the fact, you learn, you pay attention, like, I'm curious what allowed that to happen. Maybe it's because I really let go of my worries, or maybe I got really focused on my breath, or there was a nice quality relaxation. That's the doorway, maybe. So I understand the conditions that allow that to happen in the future, rather than demanding it happen or demanding it stay. That's two very different things. That's where the wisdom comes from mindfulness.
And also the recognition that sometimes that I will have the experience of, what are we having for dinner? Shoot, I forgot to go to the grocery store. The dog's barking downstairs.
Right. All of that.
Did I pay the
gas
credit card bill this month? Right. Like all of those things.
All of those things, right? Totally normal. And that's, a lot of meditation is kind of humdrum, mundane stuff, because that's part of life. It's a lot of humdrum, mundane, getting the kids to school and buying the groceries and feeding the dog. And, and other times, there's more peaceful sweetness, openness. And we take that as much as we welcome that, as much as we welcome the back pain. That's the key to peace.
So, I loved this. I learned so much today. Can you tell us where people can find you, where they can find your book, which I highly, highly recommend for people who like to read, because it's going to be one of those that lay next to my bed probably forever, and I'll just pick up and read. I think that's the beauty of it, is you don't have to necessarily read it chronologically. You can pick up a chapter, and what sort of resonates with you at that time you can reference. But where can everybody find you?
Yeah, so my website is markcoleman.org. That's M-A-R-K Coleman, Coleman.org. And that has all my information about my books and meditations and my schedule. I teach a lot of meditation retreats and teacher trainings. So that's a good place. And then to get the book, you can get it on Amazon or Indie Books, or hopefully your favorite local bookstore that might still be in business. And it's available starting May 14th.
Great. And it will be available by the time everybody hears this.
Great.
But all of this information will also be in my show notes for people to track you down as well. Great. So, and next, you're going to lead me in a meditation now, which I will post, which will drop next week on the podcast. So stay tuned for that as well. And thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a really pleasurable just a great conversation. So
yeah, this was great. Thank you so much. Like what you heard today and want to hear more? Curious about what comes next and what it all means? You can subscribe on iTunes. Just go to podcasts and find Life, Death, and the Space Between and hit subscribe. And you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Dr. Amy Robbins. Ask me any questions you might have. Let me know what else you'd love to hear about, or just share your story. I can't wait to hear from you.